Let's get to deal with the matters that we have tabled for discussion this morning. And we start, of course, with the most ambitious project that the government is embarking on, and that is the free SHS. What's it about again? Because last week we spoke about it, the previous week we also dealt with SHS. Today we will try to answer some of the critical questions about the free SHS. Questions that have come up about sustainability. The president seems to give a hint as to how where the money will come from to sustain the program. There have been questions about quality according to the minority, and also sustainability by the minority and other stakeholders. Well, the president and the minister, Matthew Opoku-Prempeh, appear to be giving us hints of how all of these things that we are complaining about should not be a worry, because they have been taken care of. And private schools are crying that they will be collapsed because of the new program. You know, 2 headmasters have been sacked, 9 others have been interdicted for charging unapproved fees in implementation of the SHS, justified or harsh. We will deal with all of this. So I think it's good to start with the minister, who also speaks for the president. But do you get worried that it does appear that your role as a speaker for the president, spokesperson of the president, is rather not highlighted? Because I hardly even get to hear you being introduced as someone who speaks for the president.
Well, that's because in our society, you know, when they say you are minister, you know, that's when people think that you are weightier.
Yeah,
generally, in the estimation of people, the ministerial position is weightier.
The spokesperson part is draft off completely, you know, as if done away with.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's because people think that when you're called minister, it's weightier than being called spokesperson, because there were periods in this country when we had presidential spokespersons and ministers of information at the same time. The ministers for information attend cabinet meeting and other high-powered meetings. Spokespersons don't get to go and so on. So I'm sure perhaps there is
there's been a song to celebrate the commencement of free SHS. What sort of innovation is that?
Well, it's not an innovation, I must say. There are songs that are composed to, if you want, herald so many things in our country. And the fact that this is the first, if you want, nationwide search policy, not the first policy on free senior high school, but the first policy of its kind that covers the entire nation. And so because of the novelty, and in fact, you realize that for the past 3 weeks, that is what has dominated the headlines. In my estimation, before the free SHS issues came up, I thought that the news cycle in Ghana had virtually whittled down to 24 hours. After 24 hours, the news fades and another one takes over and so on. Maximum is 48 hours. But this one has sustained itself for 3 weeks. So that tells you the weighty nature of this particular.
But is it really just 3 weeks? Not how many years? Because I remember following you on the presidential campaign and on the vice presidential campaign. Long ago, 2008, and then in 2012, free SHS has not suffered, you know, lack of presence in the media.
You are right, you are right. I said 3-4 weeks because in this past 3 weeks, there's been a certain buzz. Okay, but quite frankly, yes, since 2008, when the current president, who was then candidate, you know, introduced the subject into our body politic, you know, it's generated a whole lot of debate as to whether, and of course, that's one of the issues we'll be discussing shortly, sustainability, as to whether it is possible in the first place, as to whether it is sustainable, as to whether it was a con job, 419, etc., etc. We don't have the resources, or a hoax, and all of that. So naturally, it will generate the kind of euphoria that it has generated. So as far as I'm concerned, and it is a lifesaver for many people.
Okay, so now just hold on there, and let's hear what the president had to say about it when he fully launched it. You hear the president, we'll hear also a couple of people, including the minority. We'll hear the private schools. They had an organization whose general secretary is Joseph Jamesi, who also spoke about the fact that over 200, almost 300 private senior SHSs are going to collapse. They employ over 10,000 persons in this country, and yet they're going to lose out on this. What is the way forward for them? And then we'll hear also the minority on the free SHS. We'll hear Dr. Yao Educhum. He is, if you like, the man that that is getting all the applause now as leading the process in a manner that people feel is quite commendable. And then we'll hear Angel Kabonu of NAGRAT on the free SHS issues. So let's take a trip to the week and how the matters have panned out as far as the stakeholders are concerned.
Leadership is about choices. I have chosen to invest in the future of our youth and our country. We've decided to use the proceeds from our natural resources to help educate the population, to drive our economic transformation, to ensure that no child is denied access to secondary education. We are removing one of the biggest obstacles that currently stand in their way: cost. The cost of providing free secondary school education will be cheaper than the cost of the alternative of an uneducated and unskilled workforce. A government may not be able to make every citizen rich, but with political will and responsible leadership, a government can help create a society of opportunities and empowerment for every citizen. And I know no better way to do so but through access to education. As is with all human endeavors, we will certainly face challenges in the implementation of this policy of free SHS, despite our best preparations and efforts. We may falter, but by the grace of Almighty God, we shall not fall, for we will be ready in all humility to accept inputs and criticisms aimed at improving the policy.
We want to place on record that we as private senior high schools in Ghana are not against the free SHS policy. No serious educator can be against a government intervention that seeks to make secondary education more affordable and accessible to Ghanaian children. Our concern is with the way the policy is being implemented. CHOPS wants to register our complete disappointment with the way the government is implementing the free education policy. We consider the development so far as undermining the contribution of private SHS in the educational sector. It is as though the government is intentionally trying to collapse all private SHS in this country. What does it say about government's regard for private SHS when she is ready to post 92% of students who graduated from the JHS into public senior high schools and pay all their fees? Which students will patronize the private SHS? What is to happen to the millions of Ghana cedis that has been invested into our schools? What is to happen to 10,000 plus Ghanaian workers who are currently employed in our schools? What is government's plan to provide a platform that gives our schools a realistic chance to thrive?
What we are telling schools is that there's something around the world called intervention, response to intervention. In schools around the world, that you get a student who is not doing well, the school must have an RTI program where you select students who are struggling and are not doing well, you provide them support. Right. You see, that is the mark of a successful school, when those who are not doing well are provided support.
Okay.
You see, in some schools, students are just coasting. Schools are coasting because they get all the best students, and at the end of the day, they turn out the best results.
They don't put in much.
Because
as teachers,
it's when you get the most challenging student. As a teacher, I've taught for 10 years mathematics.
Right.
When you get the most challenging student, and at the end of the day, that student does
transformed.
well. That is when you smile.
Oh.
So I repeat it for the record of the media. A total of 565,404 Ghanaian students in senior high schools comprising year 2, second year, and third year, those he campaigned with, they will not benefit from this. Those who will benefit are those graduating from JSS, known as first years. If this is not a grand deception, tell me what is. By his inability to roll out free senior high school to cover those in second and third years, as I've indicated, it does not guarantee equitable access and raises questions that borders on they not keeping faith with the pledge that they made with the people of Ghana.
Right. So, starting with where Nanado, began by those statements that he made. He said that the cost of providing free senior secondary school education will be cheaper than the cost of the alternative of an uneducated and unskilled workforce that has the capacity to retard our development. Leadership is about choices. I have chosen to invest in the future of our youth and of our country. The goal is to raise a generation that will ensure the speedy development of this country. That's obvious, isn't it? But question is, how do we sustain it?
Well, as you can see, our language, ever since we mooted this idea in 2008, hasn't changed to date. Since 2008, we have always insisted, and indeed the president reiterated it in his launch speech, that leadership is about choices, and that leaders to choose to do with a nation's resources what they want to do with it, depending on what their focus is. You would also remember that since 2008, we have always said, and I said it severally on this program, that President Akufo-Addo had said that he was against, at that time, what he called a sope-sope budgeting. Sope-sope budgeting, in his view, is where you say we have 100 million cedis per year to spend as a nation. And then we take the 100 million cedis and then we proceed to, as they say, chop it in pieces and distribute it in bits and pieces to all the various ministries and sectors of our country to pretend to be doing something meaningful with them. For most of the time, what every ministry or department or agency gets is not enough to meet its goals, whilst at the same time it is pretending to be doing what it is supposed to do. So at the end of the day, you don't have a certain effect, okay, of what our development goals and priorities are. So he had always argued that when he becomes president, he will identify what Ghana's priority needs are and channel the bulk of our nation's resources into that. And you remember in 2008, when we were campaigning, we also took time off to visit other African countries. At that time, they said that the campaign was in Ghana. Why were we traveling? We studied other African economies and those that we thought had made progress. What is it that they were doing? And then we realized that in most nations, what they do is that they decide that, look, agriculture is in the area where we have a comparative advantage. So, for example, in the next 4 years, let us concentrate the bulk of the nation's resources on agriculture and push agriculture and get it out of the way. That way, another few years, you can tackle energy. Then you can begin to see the real effect of development. His understanding is that all the nations that have developed around the world have developed because they have wiped out illiteracy. okay? Because when you wipe out illiteracy, you also wipe out poverty, disease, ignorance, all of those things that we say bedevil us. And looking at the quantum of students who drop out of JHS every year because they are unable to go to SHS, he thought, look, let us commit the nation's resources to doing this. Now, the sustainability lies in another argument that we kept making whilst we were in opposition, that if we find a way of plugging revenue leakages in our country, collecting all the revenue that is required for us to collect in this country, to protect that revenue from corruption and mismanagement and misapplication and so on, we would have enough money to run our educational system, and that other countries have done it, and therefore we too can do it. So when we say that this is what we are going to do, this is exactly how we mean to do it. And we believe that if we have honest governments that are collecting the correct revenues and not wasting it through corruption, we believe that this country would have enough money to run. And this program would have enough to run. Because the cost of, look, I have the statistics for dropout rates from JHS from 2013 to 2016. From 2013 to 2016, 2013, 26%, 2014, about 29%, 2015, 28%, 2016, 27% of students who were supposed to proceed to SSS dropped out. That's an average of 100,000 students a year. This year, when free SHS has been introduced, as we speak, 99.2% have printed out their admission forms and are queuing in the various schools and registering when we haven't ended. So meanwhile, we had even targeted this year that we wanted with free SHS to get 84% enrollment, because the highest that we ever got was 70%. Okay. So we said we will raise it to 84. Now we see that we are passing the 90% mark. So that tells you clearly that cost was a huge barrier to why students were dropping out. And so if there's a government that is committed to eradicating illiteracy in our country, as the president said...
And the dropping out is explained to mean that they had places, but they didn't take them.
They didn't take them. They didn't take them. That not enrolled. That's why I wrote it here in my notes as not enrolled. Right. They were placed, but they didn't go and enroll. Right. 100,000 of them every year don't go and enroll. For most of them, because they can't afford it. This year, we've tried the cost. Of course, as an academic, straight away, I do not want people who are listening or watching to understand that I mean cost is the entirety of the reason people don't enroll. But cost is certainly a huge factor. Now that we have tried to take off the cost element, okay, or the cost aspect of the reasons that impede people from placing, we see that 99.2% are enrolling. So that really should be a confirmation of the fact that cost was a huge barrier in why people were not enrolled. Okay. And therefore, if we are supposed to, as the Sustainable Development Goal 4 says, by 2013, all boys and girls should complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. How are we going to ensure that by 2030, at least the minimum qualification, educational qualification in our country is a senior secondary school certificate if we don't begin the process of free secondary education? 2030, that's what the Sustainable Development, that by 2030, every child, boy or girl, should have at least secondary education.
Is it
how many years down the line do we...
Is it coincident that the president has been giving the honor of leading the eminent team in this regard? Because he's been talking about this for how many years now? So it cannot be that because he's about to roll out free SHS, that is why they give that honor to him.
No, the honor of being co-chair for the Sustainable Development Goals. No, I don't think, well, quite frankly, I don't want to say, I don't know what went into the thinking, but of course, he's been in the public space in Africa for years. He's been foreign minister. So I guess that the United Nations has constantly followed his thoughts and his arguments on what it is that we need to do as a nation to develop. And somehow they believed that he was speaking the right language. And therefore, perhaps if they make him a co-chair for the Sustainable Development Goals in his own country, he would somehow be compelled to try and push those goals and get to their realization. I think so.
Sustainability is about money.
Yes.
The president hinted that money from our natural resources
Yes.
is what is going to be dedicated for this purpose.
Yes.
The minister, Matthew Poku Prempeh, has also spoken in this direction and actually suggested an increase in the VAT rates. So you're not doing any magic, really. It's not even any thinking outside of the box.
Well, we haven't said that we are doing magic. The argument is still very simple, that leadership is about choices. Finish. Leadership, I mean, choices are things that everybody can make, and we all make choices every day when we wake up, even the shirt to wear, the food to eat. We make choices every day. So our choices, they are very ordinary. Everybody can make a choice. And
but
therefore,
if it's
every
about,
leader,
it's about increasing the financial burden of the citizens,
yes,
you know, to fulfill a constitutional obligation on you,
yes,
you're not doing anything different.
What we are doing different is what I said in the beginning. You know, for academics, we always talk about theory and practice. The theoretical underpinning of this, our reasoning, is that, look, natural resources are for the people. They are the reason God has made us Ghanaians and put oil, gold, diamond in this land is because God wants each one of us individually to benefit from these oil resources. Now, we make roads. We build schools, we build public places of convenience, etc., which people go to. But tell me, how does a Ghanaian feel directly inside his home and in his pocket that this is my share of Ghana's oil revenues? This is my share of Ghana's gold resource. Look, in Libya, before Colonel Gaddafi died, if you gave birth, a woman gave birth in hospital, and the birth was registered, they gave you 2,000 United States dollars as your child's share of Libya's oil resources. Because Colonel Gaddafi said, the oil resources are for the Libyan citizens. I can make roads, build skyscrapers, and so on. But that does not make a Libyan citizen feel directly that I am benefiting. So this one, yesterday, a friend of mine called me from Kumasi, for example, and said that a man came to the Ahinsan Mosque, Friday Mosque at Ahinsan, and gave money after the prayer to the Imam and said, Imam, pray fervently for Akufo-Addo and the MPP government. He said, why? Because none of my children had been able to cross JHS. For the first time in my life, 3 of my children, and you know our people, we have polygamous families and so on, I have been able to take 3 of my children to senior high school. So for the first time, I've broken a myth inside my family, thanks to Akufo-Addo. Now, how much is that? 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. That's 3,000 Ghana cedis. That he would have had to go and cough, borrow, whatever. Now, he sees it virtually as 3,000 given to him as his share of Ghana's oil resources. So there is no Ghanaian family which can now say, I don't feel the benefit of our oil resources. And I hear it every day. That since we discovered oil, the politicians are the one who are appropriating all the oil money to themselves, awarding dubious contracts, and spending the nation's money. Okay. We want every Ghanaian to feel a part of our resources.
Right. Honorable, you would realize that this argument had come up before, and I wish that we don't go back to the populist argument about whether or not free SHS is good or bad, because we all know that the minority is not against free SHS, because the minority actually says that this is a continuation of what is started. That's a question. There are questions about that, though, because it appears what the NDC started was a scholarship scheme for a small segment of society, vulnerable members of society, rather than a free SHS, so to speak. Now, Senior Minister Yaosaf Mafo had hinted that you were going to use the Heritage Fund for this purpose. There was a lot of debate that this is not true, and so on and so forth. And then the Finance Minister, Kenneth Furiata, came to Parliament, you know, in 2017 and gave a statement in which he said, we're going to fund free SHS with the annual budget funding amount, ABFA. Of course, he did say other domestic resources would be used. Did you expect that we're going to be speaking about oil cash and 0.5% on VAT?
Thank you so very much, Samson, and let me say good morning to my co-panelists, and particularly thank Abdul Malik Okubaku. I remember when the incident of the spy device was detected in my office. Okubaku, my brother, was one of the few persons, including Opon, who reposed confidence in me and believed in my honesty.
I don't think there are few people,
because
there are many people who hold you in a certain category of persons with integrity.
Yes, so,
those he heard.
Those
you heard.
Yes, those I heard, and he said it on this your platform, and I never had opportunity to say thank you to him. And this world where honesty and integrity is matter, the short supply.
Okay.
If a person in the stature of Abdul Malik Okubaku reposes such confidence in you, then I mean, you must be thankful.
Okay.
So thank
The
you.
lizard that falls from the high Iroko tree will praise itself.
Well, this argument about free education ought to be put in historical context, and I've heard many arguments, many statements being made, which obviously doesn't speak to the truth of the matter. Aspects of free education have been with us in Ghana since the time of Gordon Gorgesberg. Nobody, whether we were in the southern sector, the northern sector, the western sector, or any sector in Ghana, paid tuition fees for public secondary school education. That was borne by the people of Ghana. Nobody paid textbooks user fee in this country since the time of Gordon Gorgesberg. But the decision to always expand the remit of things that could be enjoyed free at secondary schools, came with succeeding governments. Indeed, when Nkrumah took over, apart from the free secondary school education, in terms of tuition and textbooks, he instituted a scholarship scheme for the northern part of Ghana because he had seen a gap, a development gap between the north and the south. In 1992, we went constitutional. And then we put it in our constitution, Article 25. And it says, Article 25, 1b. Article 25 says that all persons shall have the right to equal educational opportunities and facilities with the view to achieving, the full realization of that right, secondary education in its different forms, including technical and vocational education, shall be made generally available and accessible to all by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive introduction of free education. It's a constitutional injunction. It's part of the fundamental rights. So the Constitution itself, which we gave to ourselves, contemplated a gradualist approach to the introduction of free education. Never mind that we've gone full hog, and it's commendable. No one says that it's not commendable. It's very commendable. Indeed, it was quite nauseating actually to hear ministers say that when NDC is voted back to power, we will roll back free education. I mean, I don't think that they read the Constitution. That is the ultimate. Any government that wants power will be moving towards making education free. That is the ultimate. It's a constitutional injunction. It's a directive of the Constitution. It's not possible. What have we seen? And
despite it being a right to be enjoyed by the citizens and an obligation on the governments to provide it, it's taking us how many years?
Yes, because the Constitution said that it should be progressive.
Oh. And in your understanding of the terminology used in the Constitution, progressive
means
reasonably
first
should
of
mean...
all, you make facilities available. You make you look at the way your economy is expanding and see whether your economy can bear same. Because you just said it, are you going to impose hardships?
Since 1992, it's been taking us forever.
Since 1992,
it's been taking us forever.
Since 1992, states have collapsed. Other states have collapsed. We have not collapsed. And so I mean, you need to understand that in looking at the introduction of, I mean, now he says their language has not changed. The language has significantly changed. And I was surprised when the president himself alluded to assertions that some people said it could not be done in 20 years.
You said it would be done in 20 years.
Okay, but he said some could not be done.
No,
he said some could not be done in 20 years. Free education could not be done
until 20 years.
That's what he said.
Yes.
But why did they say that? Because the manner the promise was made to Ghanaians. You know, you have said constantly on this platform that you are an academic.
Yes.
And being academic, we are entitled to challenge the opinion, to question the opinions of people and challenge their views.
Of course.
The manner in which the promise was made gave rise to the challenge whether it could be implemented. Because you didn't promise progressive free education. You promised universal education. Universal free education, that was the promise. Not progressive. What you are doing actually is giving meaning to the same constitutional injunct of making it progressive. So you say, our progressive. By the end, this is progressive. We said we are going to expand facilities. We are working on a platform, a baseline on LEAP, that people, families who were enjoying LEAP were below the poverty line. So their children, if they got admissions into secondary school, will take the cost. We said many people, and he said 40%. Indeed, the NDPC says that by 2015, 950,490 people between the ages of 12 and 14 could not proceed beyond GSS. Last year, or the year before, we had seen that 40,000 students could not proceed to GSS based on cost and accessibility. That's what we saw. So we said, let's expand day secondary schools, make them closer to the communities so that we could have access. We could give access to those who, by reason of distance, could not go to secondary schools. So it is the way and manner in which the promise was made by His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, then flag bearer of the MPP, which got people to criticize, to challenge the view that in that manner, free education could not be implemented, or it could take so many years. Now he's seen the wisdom. In fact, NDC has been vindicated. He's seen the wisdom. And that's why he said, we are starting with first year. So progressive. But for us, it's not expanding the facilities, it's starting with the years. So what do we say? This year, when the budget was presented, 400 million Ghana cedis was made available. At that time, it was equivalent to $100 million. Now it has been up to 480, but the value is still the same. It's still $100 million. Okay? That is for first term, because the budget that was passed in March will run its full course by 31st December of this year. So the 400 million in that budget, or 480 that has been promised by the Minister of Finance, is for the first term. So next term...
So far, 280 has been disbursed.
So far, 20% of that money has been disbursed. Not 50%, 20% of that money. We hope that the 80% will also go. Now, so next term, we have to cough up another 100 million. And the third term. And that is for first year. Then second year, there will be a geometric progression. Okay? Instead of 400 students, we should be thinking of how many? 800 and over students. So you are going to be thinking of doubling the amount of money that you voted for this year.
Right.
Then the third year, you have another geometric progression. You add, so the progressive free education as introduced now will run its full course. And the minister, Dr. Chum, is not right. It's not comprehensive. What they are introducing is not comprehensive free education. It's progressive free education. It will be comprehensive in the third year. So that we have secondary education in public schools shall be free.
The NDC's expectation was a start that covers forms 1, 2, and 3.
No, it was not our expectation. That was the promise.
The promise does not say specifics.
Oh, the promise said that all Ghanaian children. Oh, you have the manifesto. Read your manifesto.
It said
read the manifesto.
We will redefine
secondary
education. That's where it started from. To include the senior secondary education, right?
Yes.
And they said it is going to be made free.
Yes.
So they've started.
But we didn't tell you.
They've started. They said it was going to be made free. And they have started. You go ahead. I'll read it.
I was looking for the manifesto, and
I'll go for the portion.
Can you? Okay, thank you.
I'm Googling it right now. I'll put it for you.
Thank you. On education.
Yes.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you.
Yes. So what you're saying is that they started on the wrong footing.
No, they've not started on the wrong footing. I've not said that they've started on the wrong footing. I'm saying that
on a deception.
There is no basis for calling into question the criticism that was issued against the MPP when they made that promise in 2008, 2012, and 2016. Indeed, it even had more credence when in 2012, Nana Dodanko Akufo-Addo, in a VB interview on Hard Talk, did not know how much it will cost the nation to implement free education.
Read.
Okay? So it says that the MPP will redefine basic education to include senior high school covering vocational, agricultural, and technical schools, and make it available for free on universal basis.
Exactly.
What did I say? Didn't I say they promised universal free education?
So they've started.
But that's what they've started in first year. Is it universal? There are two systems running in our public schools now. The system that was started by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, and the system that is being run by the MPP.
Okay.
This is what I've said. I've not used any word that is
the system started by John Dramani Mahama, catering for how many students in a year?
I don't know the total number of students that were being catered for under the system. I'm just saying that under the system run by John Dramani Mahama, the issue was, how do you provide?
You have a system that was catering for 1,000. Now you have a system that's going to cater for 400,000.
The minister says he's an academic.
And that's a comparison.
The minister says he's an academic. The system. He is. I know. Now he's not lecturing. He's a full minister. Probably he's a political academic now. So look, this is a social policy. It must have outcomes. It must have targets. The system and the NDC targeted equity, targeted equality, targeted sustainability. I've not heard the targets yet. And they had outcomes. Expand facilities, train teachers, equip the libraries, equip the science labs, so that you can have quality education.
Okay, my question simply is
I'm not looking at numbers.
How do you put a system where you go to the World Bank and ask for money to give to certain vulnerable persons in the society to pay for their fees to go to school, and you are looking at 1,000 people? How do you compare that to what is happening now as the same?
I'm not comparing. There are different modes. It's like you're going to Kumasi. You decide that I'm going to go by a VXR, and someone says I'm going to go by jet. Obviously, the person going to Kumasi, you finally get to Kumasi. But the person going by jet will get there before you.
Supposing that averagely that approach was catering for 10,000 students a year, how many years would it have taken us to get to, where over 400,000
see, that is the fallacy.
are taken care
That's the fallacy. You throw in the red herring. Why did we say that we should do education on progressive basis? One, the Constitution itself, and I'm happy you are a lawyer, the Constitution itself contemplates a situation where we can build and improve upon the prosperity of the people of this country, where the numbers of people who will be requiring public support will reduce.
Okay. Can you conclude on your take on whether or not you are certain that VAT is going to be increased? The minister of Education says let's put 0.5 on VAT because it's useful for this purpose.
I'm certain that the government will have to find a sustainable means of funding public education.
And the easiest way will be VAT.
Well, the easiest way will be discretionary charge. I mean, putting money on something. I mean, you have to raise tax.
Right.
And the tax must be dedicated to that, to secondary education. That would be the easiest way, like we have done for the GET Fund, like we have done for NHIE.
Right.
Like we have done. So that would be the easiest way, so that all of us will contribute into the pot, and the money will be used to fund.
And of course, the oil money will be accessed as well.
Well, for the oil money, you see, what again? There's nothing new about what he has done, and his minister, and that's why he's Minister for Information. He started in a better way. In oil revenue utilization, you can decide to do direct distribution, direct transfers. And then you certainly leave it. That was what they were doing, direct transfers. Give the money to direct transfers. So
there's a reason he's asking because the two of them, you did your masters
in
together.
Oil and gas.
In oil and gas.
Yes, they were the first cohort.
Oh, he knows my position.
Yes, anyway. Direct transfers. Okay, you can do direct transfers. That look, citizens of the country must benefit directly from the resources of the state. So you transfer every month to them. Okay, so that's what the minister is saying. That look, the people of this country must see the real benefits of the oil. So they've decided to use the oil resources to transfer directly to the people. But this time, to build the human capital. It's good.
Right.
In fact, education, an Oxford professor once said that the surest way to fight poverty is to educate the people. Yeah. So I agree entirely.
Samson, I just want to provide him with information that you asked him to provide, which he couldn't.
Which one?
He says that their concept of progressive involved retooling, rehabilitating, and refurbishing schools.
And which information are you going to provide?
I'm going to say that in 4 years, under President Mahama, you did 50 schools, facilities upgrade. This is the list in my hand.
Facilities upgrade?
Upgrade, yes. You were upgrading schools as part of your concept of free SHS.
Okay.
You did 50 schools.
I've got the book here.
In 4 years.
You are holding the paper. I've got the book here.
You have the book here. You have the famous green book.
The information that you have. Book. Yes. If you want authentic,
you hold on.
I'm coming.
Which custody?
You should have custody.
Who provides?
This is a Ministry of Education document.
What is it? What is it on the paper?
Oh, please.
No. It's custody matter.
Please allow me.
You did 50 schools. For example, a Jurassic Dumasi SHS. You did 1 3-unit classroom block and 6-seater WC toilet. Really? How does building a 6-seater WC toilet and a 3-unit classroom block answer the question of people who are dropping out of school and can't get access? And if you are doing this for 50 schools every 4 years, and we have over 600 senior high schools in our country, when are you going to finish upgrading all these schools for us?
You say, how does it answer
the
question of people dropping out?
Yes, how does it answer?
Can you also look at it? How does it not answer and serve the purpose of the free SHS now?
No.
How does it?
How does it not serve the purpose of the free SHS now? Because you ought to be leveraging on that.
Certainly, if you build 3-unit classroom blocks, no doubt about it, our free SHS now would enable more people to get classrooms to sit in. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Okay. I haven't said that.
And something you asked a question.
And
let me read this to you.
Yes.
You said how many people? The program, that is the Progressively Free Secondary Education. The program in 2017 has been expanded to cover 2016-2017 academic year. Has been extended to cover 120,000 boarding students.
There was no paid for. Please
Yes.
forget about that.
It's
It
not,
didn't
well,
happen.
well, well,
That
well,
aspect didn't happen.
it's
So
not
don't
well,
go there.
well, I'm reading.
You give scholarships to 10,400 students over a
That
3-year
didn't happen.
Right.
I don't think we should waste time
Right.
on that
Right.
aspect.
No,
It didn't
The
happen.
former deputy education minister,
It didn't happen.
Samuel
it didn't
Okudzeto
happen.
Ablakwa, will not quote this.
It didn't
It
happen.
didn't happen
Right.
at all.
Thank you. All right. Right. Okay, so
See the
thank you,
problem
thank
with
you,
the book.
thank you for that. Yeah. Yes. Okay. A good point to come to Kuku, and I'm sure that you're yearning to hear his voice now. Okay, so Kuku, on funding and related matters, what do you have to say?
Well. You see, this is not the first time I've heard a president point to oil and natural resources as a source of funding. This is not the first time. In the course of the campaign, he made those points about the oil revenue, or part of it would be applied to, dealing with this free HS thing, and even the national insurance. Subsequent to that, I remember President Mahama also adopting the same point. It's all documented. So it's not new. But I'm not too sure that at the end of the day, we will end up with only the oil and natural resources as we move forward. There could be other sources of revenue, internally as well as externally, that could come together to help us make this thing sustainable. Funding is key. There's no doubt about it. No matter what you do, funding is key. And I realized that this administration actually considered 3 options. I've been able to assess some of the minutes of cabinet meetings and things that they did. I brought them here. And they looked at all the options, the NDC option, the so-called progressive free SHS, absorbing the fees and things. Then they looked at the subsidy one, looking at targeting poor and vulnerable people. And then they looked at the third option, which was the one they are implementing. But even then, they had 3 variations of it. Doing it for all, the first to the 3rd year, or doing it for the first year and rolling it out and out. And they looked at all the financial implications and decided that whilst it is desirable, the one about the way the NDC interpreted the universality at once, which is not what is in the manifesto as far as my little limited English is concerned. They are putting an interpretation on it and insisting that that is what you said, go in that direction. That, to be honest, is, we can engage in those intellectual exercises. But truly, it comes to pragmatism. The government has a mandate. It looked at all the options and it says, yes, my ultimate desirability is to have that comprehensive thing. But what are the possibilities? And what I have known as a left-wing activist is that you look at what is immediately practicable. If you do what is immediately practicable, it will enhance the possibilities for you to achieve the ultimate desirability. And that's what they are doing. And there's an extension between what they are doing today and what the NDC did. Indeed, what they are doing today still contains the NDC things. They haven't eroded them. The subsidies or the scholarships, whatever you want to call it, for the continuing students that the NDC put in place have been retained. Am I right?
Yeah,
and retained, yes. And then they have started the comprehensive one at year 1. Step by step. This is a government that has a 4-year mandate. From the way I see it, they intend that by the 4th year, they would have had the 3 streams all incorporated. I don't see the big deal there. You see, we should move beyond the debate, the earlier one. I've been tempted, but I've decided to resist the temptation in going in that direction. Because you see, was it progressive free HS or was it comprehensive free HS that was at stake? I remember somebody said, anything free does not bring quality. And that it doesn't even make sense to think of free education and that it's not possible. And some people tagged on it. Now they are telling us, oh, they were talking of progressive and not comprehensive. The issue was whether something free ought to be implemented and operationalize. And we were told. They went for a tape of a pastor, a very good pastor, a pastor I like, and circulated. They paid for it. These are facts. But I think that we've passed that stage. Where we are now is that the program has been rolled out. It has challenges. It has difficulties. That's where the focus should be. And I've heard people say, oh, where is the policy document? Is he? Well, I've checked and I've seen some implementation guidelines. I don't know whether somebody would suggest that the absence of a policy document, the consolidated policy document, is such a fatal deficit or injury to implementation at this stage. It is not. Indeed, this document I'm holding here gives you all the guidelines and apparently have been shared with all the stakeholders over the period. All the issues being raised.
The headmasters had it mid-August?
Yeah, I'm told so. And they have discussed all, okay, the free HS package. It's what it means, the concept, what it's supposed to do. Then you come to the eligibility factor, it's there. You come to exclusion, that's foreigners and others are not part. You come to duration of funding for beneficiaries. You come to implementation timeline. You come to fees to be absorbed, okay? Then the feeding fees, the payment of subsidies, the PTA things, placement of students, establishment of IT system at the school level. All those, including the quality, issues of quality, have been properly put up here. Disbursements, the question of money, my brother Husseini raised the issue of how much. You see, I say disbursement procedures. Disbursement procedures will follow existing guidelines and practices and will be based on validated school list and submission of expenditure returns and requests backed by appropriate documentation. There will be 2 disbursements in the term, 20% at the beginning and the remaining upon submission. And note, upon submission of returns and details on students' information within 2 weeks after enrollment start date. Okay. Yes, these things were properly put down and they are following it. And there's a good reason for releasing 20% at this stage. Look, within the next 2-3 weeks, that's all they need. Then you have to know that the balance going is based on validated returns.
So that will not be a wholesale disbursement to everybody.
Yes.
You must show that this is the number of students I actually have and this is my need.
Fantastic. And even bank accounts. And I'm told about 27, 28 of them didn't have bank accounts.
They don't have bank accounts.
So they've been told to come on, put it in place. Those with bank accounts, it is going to go step by step. This is management. It's governance. Look, the noise, it's okay. They are entitled to make
But sorry, is that a special bank account or bank account for a school and the school doesn't
Actually,
have bank
most of them are the e-blocks, quite frankly.
Right.
So they are new.
Yeah, so they are new.
Perhaps
All right,
it's understandable.
all right.
But whatever it is, you need to get that element, that mischief cured in order to be able to input the money there for the appropriate purposes. But that's going ongoing. Those are the challenges. Those are the things people should focus on. And the point out there were no consultations. I've seen enough records. It's a lie. It's a fallacy. A lot of consultations took place. There are meetings, there are records. And this document I'm talking about was properly and seriously discussed. For the stakeholders, for the implementers, for the managers and administrators, and the political managers, starting this way is okay. If subsequently, and obviously, subsequently, the challenges coming up, all those things being put together, you can consolidate it with this one and have what you call a policy document. But you see, to create a fetish or make an absolute out of the so-called the absence of a policy document and create the impression that this thing has started on a wrong footing is actually to engage in propaganda masturbation.
So on the basis of the fact that this document had been circulated with the headmasters or headmistresses by sometime the 20th of August, it is fair that the 2 who have been, as it were, sacked have been dealt with justifiably, and the 9 others who have been suspended have been dealt with justifiably for charging, unapproved fees.
Well, specifics. I don't have the full details, but I've heard what is being said.
Right.
The only thing that intrigued me was the fast-track nature. I was wondering whether there was sufficient time for the engagement and for verification. But the principle is clear. Even this document, there's a point about, you know, caution, rent seeking for the placement of students in boarding facilities will be severely sanctioned. There's an aspect of the issues coming up that appears to be so. These things they were told, no? But I think that we shouldn't be in a hurry to indict or pronounce people guilty. I want to put a note of caution there. But if it turns out that indeed they violated any of these implementation guidelines, well, now who calls up?
Well, there were a total of 19. So if in all, only 11 have suffered somewhat, 2 have been sacked, and 9 are on interdiction, then it does appear that there has been a setting process that has been gone through.
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay. They give an example, for example, that there's this particular headmaster, head of Agri Memorial in the Central Region, Reverend Franklin K. Boedu. He has been invited to Accra to explain why he has underdeclared but accuses the GES of placing more students than his school can accommodate. The GES says that the headmaster has, quote, no basis for the complaint, unquote, after 450 students were placed in his school. The Ghana Education Service found out from records that at least 955 students were placed at Agri Memorial in 2016. It said there are about 1,000 vacancies at the school, and yet Reverend Franklin Boedu kicked against 450 students sent to the Cape Coast School. So
that's interesting.
Yes, it's a suggestion that some, like we have heard the minister in Volta region suggest, some are just deliberate in wanting to sabotage the implementation.
Interesting.
Yeah, start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go to that, but just briefly, on the issues that Honorable in particular raised. When you look at Article 25, language is very important. 25(1)(b), secondary education in its different forms, including technical and vocational education, shall be made generally available and accessible to all by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive, and I'll highlight that, introduction, I highlight that also, of free education. I mean, it is not talking about regressive.
No.
So if you are introducing something progressively, then it makes sense that it should affect those who are about to enter.
No, that's not regressive.
Please. No, I'm saying it's progressive.
He says that's
introduction. When the 4 years were to be reduced to 3 years, it was introduced to affect those who were entering.
Yeah.
And it did not affect those who were already in the school.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So for me, it makes sense.
It's very
and two, I think semantics are in here, universal or comprehensive. For the student entering today, it is universal and it's comprehensive for both himself or herself and the parents, because for them it comprehensively takes away the burden of that parent.
I don't want to engage in that argument with you, because you are picking you are not interpreting the provision in terms of constitutional interpretation. Because when you read that together with Article 17, you are going to fund discrimination. So I don't want you to go there.
Don't go there at all.
No. Article 17 of the Constitution prohibits or prescribes discrimination.
How will you explain?
And it defines discrimination to simply mean
treating people differently,
giving different treatment.
There are exceptions.
Hold on.
Can I?
So they are, I'm sorry, their concept or the project they embarked on, there was not an element of discrimination.
Well, question to us.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Honorable, how will you explain that to me? In 1995, all right, when 85, when I was entering, my parents paid for me. Did your parents pay for you?
My parents did not pay for me.
The state paid for you. Exactly. So don't talk about discrimination.
No,
in any case, the Constitution, you see, Article 17 has exceptions.
Says that, look, Article 17 says that.
Please.
I'm answering your question.
Taking my time.
Wait, allow him to
you ask me a question.
Keep your ideas.
The same Constitution. That's why I say don't take constitutional provisions disjointly. The same Constitution says that when you are to treat people differently based on their status, it must be in accordance with law.
Yes.
And that's why today you are passing the Northern Development Fund law. That is why today you are presenting to Parliament the Zongo Development Fund.
Listen, I'm not against
so
that.
There was a law. There was a law that Nkrumah promulgated that made Northern scholarship possible.
Yeah, so
that's what I'm telling you.
Don't talk about discrimination now.
No, that's not discrimination. That doesn't become discrimination.
Can you just allow me? Because Article 17 clearly, 17.4, usually people just state the general part and leave the exception. The exception 17.4, even B, says for matters relating, no, I'll even go to the first one. For the implementation of policies and programs aimed at redressing social, economic, and educational imbalance in the Ghanaian society. So don't talk about this.
What happens? So no, continue. So you have to go by law.
No, yeah. Listen, it says nothing in this article shall prevent Parliament from enacting laws that are reasonably necessary to provide for the following.
Yes.
So that is fine.
That's
so
law.
Doesn't the law give the president the power?
This is not the law.
Please. These things were contained in the budget, which you have passed as an act of Parliament. Okay. Is that not?
Okay, get it.
Right, let's move on. Now, so that is it. For me, for those entering, it's comprehensive and it's universal. And when you read Article 25, it separates the introduction of free education from the provision of facilities. Read 25 again, and you will get it.
What is it? 25 doesn't say so.
Now, please.
It doesn't say so.
It says all persons shall have the right to equal educational opportunities and facilities.
Yes.
With a view to achieving full realization of that right.
Yes.
Then you go to 25(1)(b).
Yes.
It speaks of the introduction, progressive introduction of free education. Then go to 25(1)(c), and then also E, the development of a system of schools with adequate facilities at all levels shall be actively pursued. So the introduction of free education deals specifically with non-payment or fees or burdening parents with the payment of fees fully. It is progressive because, as you said, from the days of Guggisberg till now, we've not been paying for the tuition fees. In fact, when we entered sixth form, we didn't pay, we ate freely. And also, it's progressive because, and it's universal now because other regions that benefited, and it is good that they did, it is now being extended to the rest of Ghanaians. That is universal. That is universal application.
But you see, even in the Northern Scholarship, so to call it, there's some element of a fee paying. But now, because of free SHS, that fee element is out.
That is what I'm going to. That is the second part.
Because those who are going second year and third year, they went with monies to pay some level of fee.
That is right. That is what I'm going. Their students,
but it's not mutually exclusive.
Listen, their students are now going to be provided for feeding or to be fed, and that wasn't part of the old one. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that's exactly.
So that is also universal. That is also universal. It's an enhancement of the existing.
For the first year. Yes.
So it is also for them.
Okay.
For them, it is also. So going to the question you asked about, I have looked at the GES Act. All right, and I have also took pains to speak to one or two people, and I think that the procedure that was adopted in disciplining or sanctioning them may not have been in accordance with the law. Now, the GES Act, yes, the GES Act, which is 1995 Act 506. Now, Section 9 empowers the GES Council to establish a disciplinary committee for various committees, including disciplinary committee under subsection 4, which is here. Then Section 19
also states disciplinary proceedings. The disciplinary committee under Section 9(4) shall examine disciplinary matters that may be referred to it by the appointing authority. So there must always of necessity be a disciplinary committee. And I have seen one of the press releases in which these sanctioning regime or whatever have been spelled out. And it started upon interaction with the headmasters. There is no evidence that that committee invited these people with a charge and that they were afforded adequate opportunity to be heard in accordance with the rules of natural justice, also incorporated in Article 19 and so on of the Constitution. And if you remember,
are you pursuing a question of form over substance or what?
Well,
that if there was the opportunity granted for them to be heard, you do necessarily need a committee to be in place.
Definitely.
To fulfill the natural justice rule.
Definitely. And I'm giving you an example.
Human rights, form and substance is so important.
Yes. Ampon, my usual case, Ampon versus Atene, the so-called Muntaka case. When the president enforcing the law caused the national security to set up a committee to investigate these public servants, two of them, Ampon and I think Adim Odum. And they recommended to the president for their dismissal. Then the president calls the head of civil service to dismiss them. The High Court said no. The law has established specific procedures for sanctioning public and civil servants. Of course, we know the history where at 1 o'clock every afternoon, some public servants were just at the mercy of the executive to listen to GBC whether or not they had been dismissed. So we have a history. And so, because they failed to do that, the High Court told the president then that you were wrong. And they were reinstated and said that that is not to say whether or not they committed any crime or they flouted any law. But the point is not so because you didn't follow the procedures spelled out in the Civil Service Act and the regulation, the entire processes were wrong and they had to be reinstated. Right. So it's always important that, and I've also heard, if you read today's, I think, graphic, the NAT and NAGRAT are all questioning even the procedure. Okay. And I've been told that by practice, there are established disciplinary committees in all the districts. So these proceedings start from there before it gets to the committee established by the council. That becomes a quasi-appellate body. But in this case, even if the council committee started it, then it will appear that their right to appeal has even been extinguished. And of course, there is no evidence that any such committee even investigated it and made recommendations to the council to dismiss them. So I think that, you see, for me, no one appreciates the necessity for free education than perhaps myself because of my own.
And because you're talking about a legal issue, the private schools, do they have a point when they say, in the same way that we have rolled out NHIS, so the private operators are benefiting, private operators of health facilities, pharmacies are benefiting, in the same light, the private SHSs should benefit. And they are talking about almost 300 private SHSs in the country. They say they are employing some 10,000 plus Ghanaians.
You see, I sympathize. Maybe it's a matter of empathy. Because you see, I said it somewhere, because most of those who get the chance to enter the so-called public elite schools were from the private schools. Unfortunately, a large number of those who attended public schools at the JSS level don't really do very well. The reverse is when it gets to the secondary school. And I've always wondered why both the private school and the government have not counted what this one does well at the primary school where it makes its students do better, and why then the government schools rather also do better than perhaps the private schools. Or why should they be responsible for those who are not able to pass the SSS exam and so on? So they play a very important role. But it's also to be matched against the fact that these are private entities. They make profit and keep the profit. Of course, they pay taxes. I work in a private school as well. So we need to balance these two competing interests. If we don't support, most of these schools, private schools, also have JSS. Unfortunately, when they churn out the best students, they go to the public schools. They don't even continue to their own schools. So they're playing a very important role. But I think that instead of maybe they were making their case vehemently or with all the force, but I think that a rather pacifist tone.
They're saying there was some initial discussion that they will be included. It will be an inclusive process, but they just realized that they have been left out
I think
completely.
they should rather also look out for other benefits. You see,
Such
for
as?
example, tax rebate, reduction in maybe the utilities they pay. All these will also enable them to at least maintain better the primary schools. At the same time, they can also fall on government for other. The government has previously, Catholic schools, for example, were private schools. The government has taken over. They can have a similar interaction with government, where government was not able to accommodate all these people, they can then transfer them to such schools, and for those people, they may encourage. They will then.
Do you think, and maybe 1 minute, maybe each, or to you, 2 minutes each, or to you, do you think that the private schools ought to be rearranging from now? Because by the NPP's manifesto promise, eventually it means they will be out of job. Because if the NPP's program, which appears to be in tandem with the constitutional injunction, is to redefine basic education to include senior secondary education, and all of which is going to be made, we're supposed to have a comprehensive implementation of F-Cube, right?
That's right.
Then it means they eventually will not have anybody to train. So should they be re-strategizing?
Well, I think so, but it also goes to the fact that what makes their schools attractive to parents at the initial stage, if they are able to do the same thing at the higher stage, of course, secondary education in public schools is not compulsory. I can still decide to send my children to the private schools. If the private schools become more attractive, as their JSS are more attractive to state schools, some parents will not mind coming there to even pay full fees, which may even be about 100 times maybe other costs they will want.
Okay.
But you see, there is one unintended consequence of this. I mean, those of us who travel, I went to Kumasi and I interacted with some carpenters. I mean, the jubilation, the fact that chalkbox are in the highest demand. Right. Some of them have been doing this for about 30 years. I went to where they sell student mattresses. Go to Tema Station, the guys who sell student sandals and so on.
Right.
They are so elated to the
I was listening to the news, local news in Sunyani.
Yeah.
And they spoke to those who sell the mattresses and the trunks and the chop boxes. There's a woman who was very candid. She said all her stock was finished, that she had this time she had taken more than she always takes, and it was finished. Yeah. Her other friends who had done the same as she did still have some they are selling, but theirs is not finished because they have increased the prices. That's and right. She felt that was unfair. Yes. But there's a booming market for these things. Mattresses.
Yeah, chop box, mattresses, trunks. And at least our parents can now keep their demands, you know, those Holland cloth which they will sell so that they will get school fees. They will now keep it, and then we will enjoy it later.
You shouldn't be happy to keep the demands.
Okay, I think that basically, I think again it comes to policy clarity. But from the way the minister has explained, I see where the
private
schools are coming in. Now, the object is to get all Ghanaian students who are desirous of pursuing secondary education into schools. Previously, it was difficult to have schools to take in all the students. A lot of infrastructure has been built. This government thinks that most of the students who qualify to go to the secondary school will have space in public institutions. So that creates a difficulty for the private sector.
Okay.
Because there was no space, the bar was set. Aggregate 24 and below or above could not enter, above, that is, to 36 could not enter the public schools because there was no space. Now the bar has been reduced, almost removed, because I hear that someone has been posted who has about 47. And so clearly, they used to take in those people. I mean, if the space were still there, I would have argued for them that since the focus is on the Ghanaian child, then probably the subsidies paid or the fees paid for the Ghanaian child in the public school should be extended to the same child in the private school, even if it means that the parents will have to top up the fees for the private sector. But now there's space. So that's what innovation does. And when it is disruptive, it throws everything. I mean, you see the mobile phone. Now we don't use cameras. Yes. You know, that's what it does. When you have an introduction of this nature and then everybody's going to the public school, definitely. In fact, like you said, the private schools must begin looking for another niche. Okay. As time goes on, they will have no space.
It does look like so.
And
yes, the NPP is said to be the government that favors, you tout yourself as a government that favors private business, private enterprise. What's happening?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, the manner in which they aired their grievances, in my view, was inappropriate. I've checked with the minister, and he says that they haven't written to him, they haven't come to him formally with their complaint. I think that it is better, rather than running to the press, to go to them and then make their case. Those cases will be examined.
The press is always the last resort. You don't think
it's the last resort. It shouldn't be the first resort. But in this case, they use the press as the first resort. That's the point I'm making. So let them come. And if there is merit in what they are saying, right now, we have extended the placement period to the end of September. Who knows, if by the end of September, all the places are full, and because we are determined to place people, and then they can agree that, okay, we will charge the same fees as the government schools. Who knows, maybe the minister will go to cabinet and table a proposal.
So they are sort of an afterthought.
So it's... Oh, but of course, because this is a program for public schools, and governments are responsible for public schools or public affairs, not private businesses. So fundamentally, you don't even have to think about them at all. But because they are citizens of Ghana who are doing legitimate business, whose businesses ought to be protected, if they come to government and sit now with legitimate issues, the government will listen to them.
The private businesses like universities and other higher institutions of learning are assisting the state in ways that the state appreciates. Yeah. I think the state's attitude to the SHSs that are private should be the same.
You know, something before Kuku comes in, Kuku, when I was about to read from the 4 years of equitable access to quality education, you dismissed me. I just sent me a text. It says NDC's progressive free education covered about 458,000 students in addition to the comprehensive free SHS that covered 10,400 needy students.
Yes, I remember him speaking about the 10,000 when he was here on the show.
That's not what I contested. Read that book. You were talking of some
120,000. The boarding schools.
Yes.
That is what I said didn't happen.
Okay, but this one happened.
Yeah, this one
you paid fees
okay, that's okay, thank you.
For 6 items.
Yes.
Okay,
out of 30 item
list,
which was 54 Ghana cedis.
Yes.
The way my brother dismissed that.
No, I dismissed that portion.
I became, to use his words, I became impotent.
Yes.
Be careful. But you see, no, just a clarity. That part was what I was contesting.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And it's a fact, it didn't happen.
That's okay. That's okay.
What a dilemma. These private sector schools, it's a real dilemma. But you see, Cabinet had decided, if you read this document I have here, eligibility stroke exclusion. So the student is qualified to access free HSS if he or she passes and is placed by the CSSSPS in a public school. It does not include students in the private SHS and foreigners. So there's clearly an official position now that they are not included. And I think the agitation now is a bit belated. It's come too late. If government decides to do a runabout and do any revision and things, it will create more confusion. It will affect the coherence and consistency of the implementation. Perhaps we may have to look into the future, what can be done for them. But right now, I sympathize with them, but I'm unable to support their call.
Right, interesting. And we will take a break, and then when we return, we'll get to check out how when you have you are paying 2.4 million United States dollars for ambulances, and you are supplied with quote Sprinter buses fitted with kitchen panels and coats. Do you still accept them? IOCO has stepped in and is investigating. We will also ask the question, what happened? So that now we realize that days after introducing the paperless system to replace the manual, clearing system at the port, we are raking in revenue in excess of 56%. So what was happening, or what has been happening all along? Well, in that regard also, the BNI has been questioning some officials of the ports. Thank you for keeping your dials here. This is Joy 99.7 FM, and on television, this is your Joy News channel. We are live also on Love 99.5 in Kumasi. We are on over a dozen affiliate stations across the country, and all over the world. You can watch or listen to us, myjoyonline.com and multi-TV world / JoyNews channel, right? And then also on DSTV, this is channel 421. Maybe before that, just briefly, because I don't want us to come back to look at free SHS again. It's such a big and broad subject, almost unable to exhaustively deal with. But we have spoken about the questions of sustainability. But another aspect of it was a question of quality, fears that quality will be compromised. And the president said that will not be compromised because there is the CEIP, and that also there'll be teacher, improvements, as well as motivation using the TTEL, which he spoke about, and then the teacher trainee allowances also having been restored. And when it comes to improving infrastructure, with the NDC did quite, a grand job in that regard. You are saying that you're going to upgrade 42 existing SHSs to model schools. And then also, you're going to have all TVET institutions, which are under 18 different ministries now and laws, come under the Ministry of Education for effective policy direction and coordination of skills development. Just in a minute, what can you say about the assurance that quality will not be lost?
Well, so far, those who have made the fear of quality argument haven't said in what respect. I can decipher from what they've been saying that perhaps they are thinking because all those who would be eligible for secondary education would go to secondary education, perhaps there would be large numbers of classes, and perhaps that will compromise the quality. That's the only argument that I can decipher. But so far, as the Minister for Education has shown you, the numbers that have traditionally gone to all of these schools year on are virtually the same numbers that are going. You mentioned Agri Memorial. There's a school in Manfe called Methodist Girls. Last year they took 850. This year, they were 770 were placed there. And then the headmaster was resisting it. A headmistress was resisting it until she was called and shown the document. Said, but you got to 850. You've been getting all these numbers over the years and nothing has happened. So the point, and then why are you refusing 700? Then she said, oh, okay. And then she goes back to accept the 770. So the point I am making to you that there are a few schools, for example, Okwapiman, where they had a girls' dormitory block, which was almost complete. And then because if that girls' dormitory block was complete, they would be able to take in a few more girls. The headmaster came to Ghana Education Service and the Ministry of Education to say, can you fix this for me? Because the contractor was invited. He's been spoken to. The contractor has promised to go back and fix it so they can take a few more girls. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we have our eyes on all of these factors that will come together to ensure both access and quality. However, it is for the headmasters, who are the implementing agencies, or agents if you want, to come to government, if you want, with cleanness, and then to be clean on what it is that is impeding their progress of implementing. And then government will address all of these things, and we move on.
Okay. What would you say about that? Because the president said that government is collaborating with various partners to implement major programs and interventions such as a Secondary Education Improvement Project, CIEP, the expansion of fiscal infrastructure, and free supply of core subject textbooks to students. Central to the projects of free SHS policy, the president added, it is the teacher. And he says, a well-trained, confident, and contented teacher is essential in the delivery of quality education. And so we can expect that teachers will also have their share. He said that the government is committed to the teacher professional development through schemes such as the Transforming Teacher Education and Learning, TTEL, at a cost of £17 million sterling. This project is supported by the UK's, Department for International Development, and it's supposed to end in 2018. But he says that will also be continued.
Thank you. These are running programs at the Ministry of Education, and particularly with the Ghana Education Service. They were there before we left office. They will continue to be there. A new program has been introduced. Many students are being posted. A cutoff for both eliminated. And so you're going to have a mixture of students not at the same level of mental development sitting in the same class. Social control mechanisms must be put in place. How can the teachers be motivated in such a way that they go to school on time? How do you add more infrastructure to limit the student per teacher ratio? How do you increase... In
respect of infrastructure, all we have been told is to pursue policy of upgrading 42 existing schools to model schools.
Even you have to expand, because you need to expand and reduce the teacher-student student ratio in the class. You have to work to improve on contact hours within the students, because the teacher will have to be incentivized and motivated, because you have to be given lesson notes. So these are all quality control mechanisms. So having introduced this program, we need to focus more, because quality without quantity without quality is equal to nothing.
Give us a disaster.
Nothing.
Okay. So that's interesting. And then he says that teacher training allowance is the start. Look at that, and you can be assured that a lot is going to go well. I think we can.
Just say this quickly. I think that we should also extend it to general staff motivation, not just the teacher, which is important, because you need people to clean the janitors. You need them to clean the place, to make it. Even those who will come and open up the place, the security men, they are all important part of this. Someone said that no one will go to space unless there is a janitor who will clean even their computers or the entire place for them. So I think instead of highlighting teacher motivation alone, we should add, at least to give to invest some confidence in the janitors and the other workers, the buzzers, and so on, to ensure even our mothers who are in the kitchen cooking. I think that's
a point well made. Kuki, you want to say something?
Well, it appears government had already considered all these things. In terms of the quality. If you read the documents I have here, most of the things we've said are all captured with more. Question of completing ongoing SHS projects, upgrade 42 as you indicated. Then when it comes to quality, it says rationalize teacher deployment and training at the SHS level, provide elective textbooks and other TLMs, make up for inadequate instructional time, equip school administrators with instructional leadership and management skills through training, and establish robust school inspection and accountability systems.
I think you should publish
Let's hope that these don't remain. These don't remain on paper.
You should make available to us.
Okay.
That's the important thing. They have to be operational.
Yeah,
but it means that government had thought of it.
Okay, great.
But we don't keep this alone.
When we return from the break, I'll be sharing your messages on the free SHS and questions of sustainability and quality before we go to the next topic. But I need to share this one. Dr. William Barboating says that as an economist, the free SHS offers opportunity for private schools to be innovative and best public schools to beat public schools. Yes, we wanted to say beat public schools to quality and attract parents' attention. He says, indeed, basic school is free in Ghana, but many parents are willing to pay 3,000 Ghana cedis a term to send their children to private schools. Right. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back. This is Newsfile. Welcome back to Newsfile. This is your most authoritative news analysis show and talking about education. And as you know, the AU has commended Ghana for this. And the AU's team is education. Interesting. Now, following a JoyNews report on the Breman Jamra Methodist School KG block, which collapsed and killed 6 pupils early this year, a newly constructed 2-unit kindergarten classroom block has been handed over to the people of Breman Jamra in the central region. You remember the incident, very sad. The facility was constructed at a cost of 200,000 Ghana cedis by Gold Key Property Limited, a real estate developer. Thank you very much. God bless you. Let's all be citizens and not spectators. Now, Musa Abator says something. We are not against free SHS, but we are raising legitimate issues which will help the program to be sustained. The program, which is already rolling, comes with numerous challenges. Government is rushing in implementing the program without policy direction. Okay, it's unfortunate that the children have to come to class and realize the essential basic elements are not in place. Why is the private schools, are they left out? Apart from the natural resources, where's the additional funding coming from? We are witnessing free SHS-1, not free SHS policy. Free SHS-1 and not free SHS policy. That's an interesting one. And this one from Mustafa Ali Mazanga in Boku says that I would like to be assured of an unambiguous statement from Honorable Inusa Hussaini that should the NDC come back to power, they would continue the free SHS policy introduced by the president. If yes, what would have been the policy variation the NDC would have introduced to complement the current one? Unambiguous answer, please. Okay, so you want an unambiguous answer. And then Ibrahim Abdul Rahman says that, and this is Ibrahim Kopa, you know him popularly as Ibrahim Kopa in Tamale. He says that the implementation of the free SHS is the first year of the first term of the NPP government clearly demonstrate that the free SHS policy is indeed dear to the heart of the president. The implementation is marked, is a mark of generational milestone in our development cycle as a country. Thanks for your message, Ibrahim Kopa in Tamale. And then Stephen Echampong is sending this from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the USA. He says that the sacking and interdiction of the head teachers is right. All artificial barriers that will stand in the way of the free SHS should be uprooted at best before they grow. So this is Stephen Echampong, often introduces himself as Spike. Now, N. Boateng sends this from the UK, and he says, for example, in the UK, every student at school has a specific capitation from foundation to sixth form, and students who attend private schools can request for this capitation, and parents top it up with the difference. Most parents of private schools don't request for it anyway. No way should private SHSs be financed by government. This is not done in anywhere in the world. Okay, even in the so-called rich country. So this is Nana Boateng in Milton Keynes in the UK. Okay, now Kofi Atta says that NDC and Inus Afuseni are being disingenuous when they question the sustainability of the free SHS for first-year students, but at the same time accuse President Akufo-Addo and the NPP of breaking their campaign promise of free SHS by limiting it to only first-year students. How could the financial sustainability question be resolved had the scheme covered all students? It is certainly popular, far better than the status quo, and should cover all SHS students in 3 years. It will be financially sustained through effective management of the economy and by stopping theft of state resources through the automation of tax revenue collection the NPP government is initiating. So this is Kofi Atta sending from Cambridge, UK. Joseph Nketia Beche says that the Asian tigers, including Malaysia and Korea, did not only offer free secondary education, but have also gone ahead to offer scholarships for a number of their citizens to study for their undergraduate and graduate degrees in Europe, the United States and Canada. Let us begin from somewhere. This is from Dr. Joseph Nketia Beche, CSIR, Crop Research Institute, Kumasi. Thanks for your messages. And this one too from John Waman in Pokwase in Accra says, Honorable Inus Afuseni, how did your government address equity through a scholarship scheme to 10,000 children? Doesn't equity mean all? Increasing VAT will spread the burden of cost. The burden will be lighter than parents bearing the full cost of educating their children directly. I hear people say parents and they say wards. Mrs. Kellever in the English department, I remember what she taught me was that when you say wards, it ought to go with the guardians. And when you say parents, it ought to go with children. So he says increasing VAT will spread the burden of cost. The burden will be lighter than parents bearing the full cost of education for their children directly. The opposition is hoping that the present government will fail, which is rather myopic and unpatriotic. Governance is all about management of a given resource. So far, the government has demonstrated prudence and pragmatism in its management approach and needs commendation. So that is John Warman in Pokwase in Accra. I'll take just a couple more and then we'll move on. Akwesi Echampong in Maryland in the USA says that, please, I want to know from Mr. Inus Afuseni, when the NDC under President Atta Mills decided to reintroduce the 3-year SSS education, they started with only new entrants. Was that universal or progressive? The NDC may want to put all the interpretations on the free SHS project. The more they try to discredit the man Akufo-Addo's resolve, the more confused and dazed they project themselves to the citizenry, including those who voted for them. Prince, I'm taking just two more. Prince Jabing Chum, sending this from Chikasi, Ukraine. He says that the NDC's argument that the government's free SHS implementation starting from the first years is a shift from their promise, simply because they promised a comprehensive universal free SHS, is very ridiculous. The NPP also promised a factory in each district. Why didn't they make the same argument when the president cut short in Ekumfi to start the implementation of the policy that is, okay, so thank you for that one. The very final one I will read, and I'm reading from no particular order. I'm just picking and reading. And Bonte Benjamin, Bonte Benjamin, he would always say that he's sending this from Ebuakwa, right? Achim Ebuakwa. Yes. He says, whilst others spent 8 years to condemn free SHS and implement create, loot, and share, the Kairing Akufo-Addo government has implemented the free SHS policy in their first 8 months to the glory of the Lord. Indeed, brains develop a nation, not resources. And when you say brains develop a nation, not resources, you should put that on quote, in quotation marks, because that belongs to Ace, Kojo, Anand, and Kuma, so that you are not accused of plagiarism.